You can stay here. Yeah, it's our assistant. Yeah, just like your wife, yeah, interesting philosophy. So we are happy to invite a well-established scholar of Kant, Halla Kim from Nebraska University and Sogang University in Korea, and he happened to be one of my classmates when I was in Iowa University. So his visit brings back a lot of memory about Iowa to me. I still remember that when we were in Iowa, we had a lot of things in common. For example, we were both Asian students, and we were both married at that time, and we both studied very hard. Yeah, and we even share the same research work for at least for a while. But we have quite different interests in philosophy. He likes philosophy, history of philosophy. I hate it. And I like logic. He hates. Well, he probably doesn't hate it, but he just told me that he doesn't read logic anymore. So the difference between us makes us a big difference. Now he's an established scholar of Kant. I'm a notorious logician in Taiwan. Anyway, we are happy to have him here. So let's give him a big hand.
Thank you, Professor Wang. I'm very honored to be here. Yes, as he introduced me and explained earlier, I was his graduate colleague back in the old days of Iowa, and we had a wonderful time together. Mostly happy memory, as well as some tragedy.
Oh yeah, it's about a Taiwanese student.
Very sad. But it's as I said, honored to be here, and then today I'm going to talk about a important view on the image of self that we have about ourselves today, and as it was developed in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant from Germany, and I hope that I'll conduct this very informally. And also in a very liberal way. So if you have any question, you can always stop me and we can discuss it. Of course, I'll be happy to fill the question at the end of my talk. It's not really a talk, it's a PowerPoint presentation. So hope that I'll be able to, explain my position in terms that are readily available, in terms that are readily accessible to all of you. Okay, so I'm going to proceed by the PowerPoint presentation. Here's my name. Let's see. It's a clicker, right?
Yeah.
So this is a conventional abbreviation, CPR, standing for Critique of Purism, the well-known masterpiece by Kant, and G for groundwork to fundamental morals. This one, critical practical reason, as well as critical power of judgment, religion, and also metaphysics of morals as well. Well-known convention. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. So here's a familiar image of Immanuel Kant, which I saw in your flyer. Rather young Kant.
How old was
This one? I bet it's about in his 30s, but he lived to be very long at the time. 1724 to 1804. Lived to be almost 80 years old, which is a remarkable feat at the time. When the average lifespan was about 30, 40 years.
That was because of child mortality. Once you get the first 5 years, you live quite long.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That I didn't know.
This is what no one knows, but it's really like
Yes. All right. Thanks, Thomas. That's news to me. So at the end of his first critique of purism, he raises these three leading questions. What can I know? What ought I to do? And what may I hope? So I'm going to develop my view of the Kantian project of what I call transcendental metaphysics of self from the questions, from these three leading questions and his own response to these questions. Those will be my two. And then I'll develop a coherent and consistent view of the self stemming from this. Lots of questions. This is a work in progress. And the draft that I sent you is not the final version, it's just counting words, which sometimes doesn't make any sense, but I hope to be able to get some finished product out of this, and hopefully I can learn from your questions that you might have, and then go from there. So the first question is about the epistemology. It's a cognitive aspects of Kant's philosophy. The second question is about practical philosophy, ethics. The third question is a synthesis of both. So I shall argue. Here's a brief synopsis of my thesis. I see that there's a set of continuities in Kant's opus as a whole in his long career, and try to extract this consistent and coherent view of the self from this opus. And as I said, those are the three pivotal questions. And I see that Kant develops a sort of a transcendental conception of self in its three operations. First operation being cognitive, second operation being practical, third operation being religious, cum cultural, cum historical operations. So I'm going to present first three aspects of the self. First, the cognitive self, which I call the understanding self. That's might be called the epistemic self or knowing self. So that'll be concerned with our scientific knowledge of the world, natural world. Second aspect of the self, which I would call is acting self, and that is something with practical aspect of the self. Practical means action. It does something with action. So it'll be concerned with his ethical view, as is developed in his well-known work, such as Critical Practicalism and Ground Cognition. Third one, I don't know. I used to call it hoping self, but I don't know if it makes sense. But hopeful self might be better. So this presents his view of the religious aspects of human being, and I'll present this self as a synthesis of both the understanding self, or rather a bridge between those two. Again, in the process, hopefully I'll be able to defend this kind of conceived self, and then I'm going to say that this self is not empty, it's not eliminable. So that's the title, ineliminability of the Kantian self. And this self shows a consistent unity, so I'm going to say that it's not schizophrenic. Furthermore, I'm going to say that this kind of metaphysics of self does not mean a return to a critical speculative metaphysics, to which Kant was so opposed to, as a starting point of his career. As you know, the first critique of purism is divided into two halves. The first half, analytic, is about his constructive metaphysics of knowledge, or rather theory of knowledge. But the second half is devoted to a criticism of traditional metaphysics. It was so effective or extensive in his criticism of traditional metaphysics that his colleague, his contemporary, a gentleman named Moses Mendelssohn, once called him all is true. Kant called Kant all is true. So that's the point that I want to emphasize, that it doesn't mean return to a traditional form of metaphysics, and that this kind of attempt culminates in its practical metaphysics, which I will discuss later under the rubric the primacy of the practical. I mean, practical reason, practical aspect of our life is more important than theoretical aspect. Furthermore, I see that Kant's famous doctrine of transcendental idealism, which is a view that our knowledge of the world is limited to what he calls the phenomenon, but as for the reality, underlying reality, we'll never be able to figure out its nature, maybe immanent. That has a certain advantage over other views, and I'm going to make use of this distinction between phenomena and noumena and use it in his defense. So I argue that this has a certain advantage over competing views such as Johann Fichte's view or Sartre's view. And finally, this has something to do with his architectonic view of philosophy, meaning that philosophy should be built as and presented as a system of which parts are interconnected with each other, and also has to present a coherent whole. So that's a brief. That will be the brief summary of my defenses. So, without further ado, I'd like to move on to our first question, namely, what can know? And we'll call it the understanding stuff. What is important is to know that Kant started out with a new strategy, with a new methodology in philosophy. He laments that philosophers have been engaged in metaphysics the past 2,000 years without producing any concrete results, unlike the brilliant sciences such as mathematics or physics. Why has metaphysics usually failed when others? Oh, do I need it? You think? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
So,
With a decisive voice.
So this is a sort of a conceptual philosophy model on natural science. You know, look at the examples of mathematics and natural science. Here, natural science, of course, means Newtonian mechanics, and he's trying to imitate the procedure. Here, I quoting directly from the first critique. Quote, the elements of pure reason in what admits of confirmation or refutation by experiment, in the quote here. So he was pretty much impressed by the advances of natural sciences, and he wanted to develop his metaphysics based on the model of this natural sciences, in his own way, of course, without being reductive, you know, in the Humean way. You know. So his procedure, his revolutionary procedure is sometimes called Copernican revolution, and I'm going to call it his considered himself Copernican self, because it has something to do with this Copernican term, according to which, as you know, objects must conform to our knowledge. Here I replace knowledge by self. So according to Kant, it should be possible to have knowledge of objects a priori, determining something in regard to them prior to being given. So this is the way that he can establish the necessary and objective validity of mathematical sciences over the natural sciences. And this new procedure concerns the form of our knowledge. So our understanding self, cognitive self, does not conform to objects. Rather, it's the opposite. The objects conform to ourselves. In a dramatic fashion, we may even say that the self, the understanding self, is a lawgiver of nature, because everything existing in nature must conform to the so-called a priori synthetic principles, established, promulgated, and issued by the self. This is his Copernican revolution. And this, I must say, takes place in the broad framework of transcendental project, I would say. For Kant, the word transcendental here refers to the cognition, which is not so much occupied with objects, but rather with a priori concepts of objects in general. And the system of such concepts Kant calls transcendental philosophy. And here, by transcendental, Kant also means the conditions of the possibilities embedded in a priori cognition. So his metaphysics is not so much about the traditional objects of knowledge, such as God, mortality, soul, and freedom, but rather it's about the conditions of the possibility of mathematical sciences and also natural sciences, such as physics. So rejecting the traditional metaphysics, the transcendent metaphysics that goes beyond the bounds of sense, if I may use Strawson's well-known phrase. He presents a sort of an immanent metaphysics about the condition of the possible knowledge. In today's parlance, we may say that it's closer to theory of knowledge. Erkenntnis theory in German, theory of knowledge. However, this concept of transcendental does not refer to an absolute in the way of Ranfete, because it has something to do with a condition of the possibility of knowledge, which he calls transcendental apperception. Apperception is a term that he borrowed from Leibniz. It simply means self-consciousness, and he says that this is best expressed by the term I think, universal I think, which accompanies all our representation. And the method may be called transcendental method, which provides a foundation for critical philosophy, namely a metaphysics of experience. This is a phrase that I borrowed from British commentator Peyton. That's not a traditional metaphysics. That's a new metaphysics concerned with the possibility, condition of possible knowledge, as I said. Okay, so far, so good. But I would say with this doctrine of transcendental idealism, he also commits to a certain metaphysical school of things, namely the distinction between appearances and things in themselves. Appearances are what I earlier called phenomenon, the sensible world, and things in themselves are referred to a lumina, the underlying reality. That's a pivotal part of his metaphysics. As for the exact nature of the understanding self, the first aspect of self that are presented, it can be found most succinctly in what is known as transcendental deduction. Sometimes this procedural proof is so obscure that this procedure is sometimes compared to crossing a Saharan desert because it's so complicated, complex, and obscure. But I think that we can share some main thread of a set of arguments there where he argues that this, I think, which is sometimes the transcendental perception, is the one that accompanies all our presentations, so that we can be attributed to me as a unitary self, which he calls consciousness in general, occasionally, in the heart. What does he do? Among the many things that he does, it involves an act of synthesis to establish it, and that's parasitic from the second deduction. Second deduction, I mean the terms of deduction that he performs in the second edition of the first critique, published in 1787. I'm sorry, 1787, yes. And the kind of unity that this achieves is called synthetic unity, meaning that it combines different representations together. So when we are presented, when we are exposed to the world, we are bombarded with a lot of different manifolds of intuition. And then our first job is to combine all of these different manifolds, different sensory inputs together. That's how we can conceptualize our encounter, our experience of the world. And that's importantly performed by the translator section. So this kind of self cannot be an individual self, cannot be a continuous self, cannot be a real self. It's as I said, transcendental self. So it's kind of self that works as a condition of possibility knowledge. But as for the origin of the manifold of intuition, this is so-called the matter of knowledge, not the form of knowledge, matter of knowledge. It should be given from outside. It is affected by the things in themselves outside of the self. So the form of our knowledge contributed by the self, but the materials of knowledge must be contributed by the world outside of the self. And this self that he presents in the first phase of his transcendental metaphysics of self is presented in two different forms. And there was a radical change between these two procedures. First deduction that it was presented in his first edition of the first critique, 1781, was heavily psychological, sometimes called faculty psychology. For example, Kant is criticized exactly for his emphasis on these aspects of work of psychology, where he discusses a lot of different kinds of synthesis. He's sometimes called threefold thesis. And Strawson, the Nestor of the I would say English-speaking work on Kant in the second half of the 20th century, criticized Kant exactly on this point. Kant was too psychological. So Strawson's point is, maybe we can discuss it, but Strawson's point is that Kant was decisive in contributing to exposing the structure of the mind as a condition of knowledge, but he faulted on emphasizing the faculty cycle too much. That was his point. And so this was anticipated by Hermann Cohen, to tell the truth, in the 19th century. This is the aspect of Kant that is not too popular among the contemporary commentators. I don't know, maybe because of this, he presents a second form of deduction in the second edition of the first critique, focusing on self-conscious, focusing on judgment, and then moving on to prove that categories, the so-called conceptual foundation of knowledge, must be able to apply to the manifold, sensible manifold intuition. So that's the first aspects of the self that Kant presented. Now I would like to move into the second aspect. The question, of course, is what would I do? What should I do? This is a form of command that is issued unconditionally. What is to be done absolutely and unconditionally. Here, the self that is concerned with is an acting self. It has something to do with our action, and that is presented most dramatically in a small but important work called Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. It is so called because he lays out the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, and later in the second critique of practicalism, CPRR stands for critique of practicalism. As I said, this view of the acting self, this view of the self, in this aspect, critically depends on the view of freedom. So we'll see that freedom is a pivotal part of his view of the acting self. Without the proper conception of freedom, no morality would be possible, no ethics would be possible, no conception of acting self would be possible. What I call the Pistorius review is a review that a good pastor, a pastor Pistorius has done in a journal of the first critique. Pistorius was a Lutheran pastor who was a very sharp review of Kant's work. Kant didn't think too highly of the contemporaries, but Pistorius was one of the rare exceptions, together with Moses Mendelssohn, whom I referred earlier. And this I will discuss this review later, but Pistorius view simply this. In his first critique, Kant suggests that traditional metaphysics is completely wrong. I mean, that's the thesis of the first critique. It's this thick book, Critique of Purism. If I may summarize in a single sentence, it would be that traditional metaphysics is completely mistaken. What's the traditional metaphysics? Metaphysics about the soul, metaphysics about freedom, metaphysics about God. His point is simple. We cannot claim that we can prove the existence of God. We can prove the immortality of soul. We can prove that the freedom will. That's the main part of his thesis in the first critique. And these are all well-known and well-discussed thesis. Yet, in the second critique, he says that we can give objective reality to all these ideas: the idea of God, the idea of the soul, the idea of the freedom of will. So, Pistorius' review is simply that the Pistorius' point is simply that Kant sends different messages about same. On the one hand, he says that the idea of God does not cannot be an object of scientific inquiry. But in the practical work, he says that we can definitely establish the objective reality concerning this idea. Same idea. So, Pistorius' point is that Kant is not consistent. So I'm going to discuss this view and then present how Kant responds to that. The second one is an important controversy called pantheism controversy. Superficially, pantheism controversy is about whether Lessing was a German Enlightenment thinker and also a dramatist, well known with such work as Nathan the Wise and other works. Superficially, pantheism controversy was whether Lessing was a hidden Spinozist, was a wavering Spinoza, who is known for pantheism, of course, the view that all is in God. But the real question about pantheism controversy is whether reason is powerful enough to be able to give us foundation for belief in God and other important topics in metaphysics. So it's about power of reason, and Kant was involved in this controversy, and we'll see that he presents his view between two extremes of complete skepticism about the power of reason on the one hand, and the complete defense of the power of reason, as you can see in the work of Leibniz and both Christian Wolff and also Moses Lewis. And of course, the third aspect is the practical term of reason that I presented as a systematic presentation of the various parts of the rational enterprise, rational edifice. So we'll see that this will be an important part of his view that not only we are capable of acting on maxims of inclinations, but also maxims of reason. So we are not only rational beings, also embodied beings. So we not only have incentives from reason, because we are rational beings, but also incentive from the senses, the inclination. By inclination, he means desires, fixed desires. Maxims are nothing other than just a rule of action on which we regularly conduct our day in, day out. But his view of the acting self is that we are not only capable of acting on maximum inclinations. This has something to do with hypothetical imperative that is based on the incentives of senses, and this is the kind of aspects of practical reasoning that even human would accept. Even human would have to accept, meaning that we always try to satisfy a desire or ends that are set by desires. But the important point is that we can also act on maxims of reasoning, maxims that we can set, and also stemming from the motive of duty, so to speak. But it turns out that this self must be able to act on a law that it lives to itself. It's about the idea of self-legislation. The law of reason, the law of morality, nothing other than law of self-legislation. That's a important part of his practical part of his philosophy. Corollary of that is that we are not only in conformity with nature, namely inclinations, but also we can go well beyond nature. We can go against nature. So we saw that the understanding self, the epistemic self, the cognitive self, is a sort of a lawgiver of nature. Here, the acting self is also sort of a lawgiver, but it legislates a law and then gives it to itself. So it's both a sovereign as well as subject. Okay. But it's notoriously difficult to justify this procedure. And in the third section of the groundwork, he tried to prove this based on the notion of conception of reason. But it's a very complicated argument. It's a procedure according to which we must be a moral being, according to which we can establish that we must be a moral being because we are a rational being, and because we are a rational being, we are free. But later he turns the table on his head and then completely rejects rejects this procedure. So here, as I said, he tried to establish the objective validity of the moral law from reason by freedom under the rubric deduction. But a certain problem occurs, which might be called circle, and then he tried to resolve it by way of what I call weak deduction, but he rejects it later. So this is a summary of the deduction, but we can discuss it, but I like to skip it. In the interest of time. But here, I like to go back to the Historious review again. And this is sometimes called the enigma of critical philosophy. How can one deny objective reality to supersensible use of the categories in speculation and theory, yet grant them this reality with respect to the objects of pure practical reason? So how do you affirm and deny one the same object reality to one the same ideas? For example, the idea of causality. Freedom is nothing other than a extended notion of causality. So in the first critique, he says that freedom cannot be known scientifically, but in the second critique, he says that freedom is real. So how can you say those two things at the same time? That's Pistorius' point. Here's an image of Pistorius. Not well known, but very sharp reviewer of some of Kant's work as well. The bottom half says Kant holds that this is the most considerable objection to the critique of pure reason. And here's how he regards or holds of Pistorius. A certain review of the groundwork of the American was one who is devoted to truth and astute, therefore always worthy of respect. That's a very such a high accolade, I would say, by non-knowing. And here's basically Kant's response to this Pistorius review. Practical reason of itself, without inclusion with practical reason. And here's this quotation from second critique. Furnishes reality to supersensible objects of the category of causality, namely to freedom, although as a practical concept, only for practical use, and hence established by means of fact, what could there only be thought. So the point is that this mixed messages on the part of Kant is due to a different use of the idea of freedom, the causality in a special extended sense. And he says that you can establish it by a certain fact, which is sometimes known as fact of reason, and we're going to turn to that subject very soon. And this is further developed by a conceptual apparatus known as postulates. So he presents the idea of freedom, the idea of God, the idea of human soul as postulates. So our next question must be, what is a postulate? Postulate is simply what gives objectivity to the idea of speculative reason, theoretical reason in general, and just by its holding concept, given the positive which could not be, it would not otherwise presume to affirm. So this is a way in which we can give objective reality to those speculative ideas. Even though we cannot essentially know these kind of objects, his view is that we can make meaningful, significant use of these ideas and give objective reality to these ideas because of their special relation to morality. If we can somehow establish morality, then this will be presented as condition of the possibility of morality. So this is how these ideas can be given objective reality, and this is how he can make response to these stories. So postulates are nothing other than presuppositions having necessarily a practical reference. Practical means moral here. Once again, the postulate is on the part of Kant. It's nothing to do with mathematical notion postulates. Theoretical proposition, even though you cannot prove it theoretically, independently, when it's attached to, inseparable to an a priori and valid practical law, you can accept this. You can rationally believe or justify in believing this. This is a postulate. I already talked about 3 examples of postulates. That there is a God, that I am free, that the soul is immortal. And he calls this credentials for freedom. So there's this interesting relation between morality, moral law, and freedom. He calls the moral freedom the ratio essendi of the moral law, namely the ground, ontological ground. On the other hand, moral law is the ratio cognition, namely epistemic ground of freedom. Because of the moral law, we can know about freedom. And he introduces what I earlier called the fact of reason as the important pivotal premise in the base of which we can be sure that we are under the binding force of morality. But as I said, the postulates are not something we can know scientifically. It's something that we can have a rational belief about, allow them, not listen. So it's not about knowledge, but it's about belief that we are concerned with here. So here's Kant's point. No, we can never able to prove scientifically that there's God, for example, but we can have a rational belief in God. That's not the point. So you can have both. You can have your cake and eat it too, so to speak. And this is nicely presented in his tripartite division among our proposition that to feel halten, taking it true. So this describes 3 kinds of propositional attitudes here. First, opinion. Second, belief. Third, not. Opinion, that's both subjective and objective sufficiency. So it not only lacks persuasion, but also conviction as well. But belief is something that we hold to be true subjectively sufficient, but not objectively so. So it has a, it doesn't have a universal scientific conviction, but you can hold them to this subjectively based on persuasion. And furthermore, I'm going to say that he uses Lavin in different senses. In the epistemic sense, and also in the practical sense. Here, it's more concerned with practical sense. Our belief, our believing in, our faith. In English translation, we may translate this as faith, not belief. Faith, but faith might be problematic because faith is something very, I don't know, personal or religious. So there's a bit of a controversy about how best to translate this term. Perhaps we should stick to German original knowledge. And finally, knowledge is both subjective and objective sufficient. So his view is the postulate concerned with the second one, but not the third one. In a famous passage from the second preface of the, preface to the second edition of the first critique in critical theory, he says, in the famous passage, I intentionally deny knowledge, descend in order to leave room for faith, namely about the idea of God, about the idea of freedom, about the idea of the immortality of the soul. So we can never scientifically know about these facts, about these things, but we can have rational belief. You rationally justify in believing these facts. For the best, to make a coherent picture of the practical life as a whole, so to speak. I've been studying Kant for the past 20 plus years. I think this is a strength of Kant as opposed to other philosophers. He was radical in his metaphysical view, but he also was very sensitive about the common sense knowledge about our life as a whole. So he not only was able to present some hair-splitting argument, but also was able to come up with some. He has this, I don't know, skill or ability to be able to strike a balance between what is complicated on the one hand, what is clear to the common sense. Here, this is one case in which he can strike a balance between these two elements. Metaphysically sophisticated, yet commonsensical. Maybe that's a measure of being a great philosopher. I don't know. Again, this somewhere Kant in conflict that I discussed earlier. A couple of images is in his medicine. Calls critique of Kant. Jewish. He was sometimes called Socrates of Berlin. Jewish philosopher, leader of Jewish enlightenment. Major Lessing, dramatist. Jacobi's view represents an extreme in the Kantian controversy. He says that because under Spinoza's scheme, everything is reduced to determinism, nihilism, and dogmatism. He rejects the authoritative reason and completely resorts to the faith. So that's Jacobi. So on the one hand, you have Jacobi, such figure Jacobi, who denies power of reason. On the other hand, you have figures such as Moses Mendelssohn, who has a complete trust in reason. He thought that we can prove God, we can prove the soul, we can prove the freedom of will. Read his Jerusalem, for example. And Kant seems to occupy the middle ground. He says that reason is able to generate, yes, knowledge of nature, but our knowledge is limited to natural world. Whatever goes beyond nature, unknowable. Then what about the idea of God, idea of immortality, soul, of the soul? Yes, there's no way we can prove this. There's no way we can achieve scientific knowledge of the world, but we can have a rational belief in those things. So that's Kant's middle position. Here's the image of Mendelssohn and another Protestant minister called I present this material as a condition of the possibility of acting self. I think I say this later, but maybe I should. How is acting self possible? I said only by means of pure reason being practical. I mean that's the thesis of second critique. The first critique, if I may summarize it, is a rejection of the traditional metaphysics altogether, and also presentation of the possibility of knowledge, condition of the possibility of knowledge. Namely, that we have categories, we have the space and time. But the second critique is about how pure reason can be practical. That's his thesis. Pure reason is practical. Remember, Humean thesis. Pure reason is impotent. Pure reason is, what's the term that he uses? Inert, I would say. Whatever can move us according to Hume would be desire, inclination. Kant says that yes, desire can move us. This is so-called philosopher's stone, right? Huh? What is it that motivates me? What is it that moves me? What is my motive? Hume says only desire can, only passion can do that. Kant says that yes, passion. There are roles that play. There's a role that played by passion, but also reason can do the work. Pure reason can be correct. That's a thesis, the second critique, if I may say. And then this is also further explicated by the commitment to the freedom of the will, immortality of the soul, and God. That's what it presents as a possibility, as a conditional possibility of the acting self in the second critique, as I see. So that was the thesis. Pure reason is practical. Pure reason can move us. Pure reason can fool us, in other words. If I may, Stevenson's language. Pure reason can have magnetism. So I'm going to skip this. This is the entire structure of the second critique, which I will skip. Of course, we can discuss it if you want, but skip this. And remember that freedom is a keystone of the whole system. Freedom is one of the three postulates, and the most important postulate, I would say. All other concepts, those of God, immortality, attached to freedom, and obtain objectivity through this. But how do you prove freedom? We saw Kant reject his own attempt to prove freedom in the third section of the groundwork, but in the second critique he says that we can prove this by the fact of reason. What is it? Is our immediate consciousness of the love and moral obligations. He even says that even the most heinous scoundrel is always conscious of the moral. He just has a weak will to be able to act on it. But the kind of freedom that he's concerned with is not empirical freedom. The kind of freedom that Hume talks of, the kind of freedom that British moralists talks of, the kind of freedom that the empiricists talk about. But it's a transient freedom. Something that we can exercise no matter what. And this freedom is proven via what he calls the fact of reasoning. And this is the only occasion in which he refers to a fact of reasoning. Factum definite. It's a practical fact that is consumed with fact. And it refers to our immediate consciousness of the moral law. And this coheres with common sense. We blame with each other, we praise each other because we hold each other free. Calls it, he uses the term, in fact, as a matter of fact, he uses the term, fact as well. So, deduction in the second critique progresses in terms of this fact and reason as well. We'll skip this. I discussed this, actually, assembly process cognitive freedom. So, I'm going to talk about this metaphysics of self, applying his notion, applying his question of how is metaphysics possible. So here is my question: how is metaphysics of self possible? Metaphysics, as a theoretical science, supersedes objects. God and freedom is impossible. That's his rejection of the traditional metaphysics. But this kind of metaphysics, transcendent metaphysics, is possible only as a disposition. We human, in a famous passage in the preface to the first edition, he says, we human beings are stuck with the fate according to which we have to raise questions that we cannot possibly answer. That's that disposition. We raise questions, but we cannot. We raise questions, fundamental questions in life, in metaphysics, but we cannot answer. So metaphysics is possible only at this position. How about metaphysics of self as terms of philosophy? I present this as metaphysics. How? And this is a metaphysics that is concerned. Immanent is not trying to be immanent metaphysics concerned with the structure of knowledge. Where science doesn't help this, identify the system of operation of knowledge. Finally, metaphysics is a practical science of supersensible objects. It's possible, but only from moral point of view, from a practical point of view. So kind of credential that it gets is different from scientific point of view. I already discussed this. Now I turn to the last part of my presentation. What may I hope? This can be found in his work in religion. Religion with the mere limits of reason alone, and no critical judgment. The conception of self that is presented, of course, is transcendental self. And finally, the self may hope that. We can hope that God exists. And we can hope that the soul is free to be. The hope is contingent on the justified belief in those metaphysical objects such as God and the soul. And I present this hope itself as a bridge between the understanding self and the acting self. Because we are rationally justified in loving and God, namely, we have a justified belief in God, who is wise and benevolent creator of the world.